Okay, so welcome back everyone to WorkSmart Live. This is our virtual reality episode. Thanks for being here. I'm Dawn Church, the events manager for WorkSmart. I want to say real quick a big thank you to our friend and client, the Durham Chamber of Commerce, for partnering with us again on this new series to make all of this great content available to the local chamber members. So last week in our Fast Forward panel, which was the kickoff of our new Back to the Future series, we did a poll with all of you about cloud technology and if you planned to adopt more of that in the future. And the options were pretty simple, right? They were yes, no, and maybe. And nobody said no, which makes a lot of sense. We're really used to working remotely at this point. We've kind of gotten into the swing of things a little bit. And the future of business is virtual, or at least more so than it was before. To give you a little bit more insight, we're not just saying this. So we've been sending out these executive leadership surveys to, I think, about 1,000 people. And we get about 100 or so responses each time. And the most recent one that we sent out came back, and those leaders said that 53% of those leaders said that they anticipated the organization that they work for will continue to work from home or do so more, at least, than they did pre-virus, which interestingly is actually higher than previously reported in the surveys. Prior to that, it was like 45%. So that number is trending up. So cloud technology is really enabling us to work from home productively. These are great things. They can enable us to have more collaboration opportunities from anywhere. But this is the reason why we're here today. As we use more cloud services, we need to think about how we control users' access to data. And traditionally, that was probably managed on a server in your office. But is that something that can be moved to the cloud to make it more manageable and more centralized? And the answer is yes. And honestly, this is a very new technology to me, but it's certainly not new to our host for today, Brian Craig, who's WorkSmart's technical account manager, and our co-host, Marissa Wayman, super familiar with this stuff as well. So to those of you in the audience, send me your questions as we go along, and we'll learn some new things with these fine folks together. So on that note, Marissa and Brian, you can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Glad to have you back. So as Dawn said, we're going to talk about virtual reality. And by that, we mean the reality is virtual. So business continuity is becoming a focal point of IT strategy. It's not just an exercise we do once a year anymore. So as we see from data from our clients, conversations we're having, and leaders throughout the industry, we expect to see the cloud to continue to make it easy for folks to stay secure and be productive from anywhere. So Brian, we've brought into our technical account manager with WorkSmart. We've brought him in to talk to everybody about kind of the conversations we're having about the cloud, and as Dawn said, about controlling users' access and device management, things that we've traditionally done on premise. So Brian, I just kind of want to start with setting some, talking through cloud services for SMBs. So, what conversations are you having with small businesses right now with respect to the cloud?
Yeah, great question, Marissa. So what we've seen across our client base and just in business in general is before COVID-19 hit, a lot of businesses were experimenting with kind of, hybrid work, 2 or 3 days a week remote, or even full distributed workforces for certain positions or for all positions within their organization. And then, as everybody knows, almost overnight, back in mid-March, lots of us went full remote for companies that could do that. So that tested a lot of our systems, tested a lot of our processes. and remote connectivity to our offices went from, maybe a couple of users every now and then to like full blown, everybody's remote. They have to access resources remote. And although this exposed a lot of deficiencies for some organizations that, may have not been fully prepared or may have traditional on-premises server infrastructure, the upside is it's kind of opened everybody's eyes to the future of distributed or remote work. So moving to a fully cloud environment, we've seen in a lot of instances can save cost. Even it provides a lot more uptime, and especially for SMBs, it allows you to scale your business efficiently, whereas you may not be able to do that with, like, you buy a server, it can support X. What if your business doubles? What if it's cut in half? And the cloud allows you to scale that more efficiently and overcome a lot of the limitations that you'll see with an in-office server environment as your folks become more distributed. So it may sound like kind of a big company thing, but the beautiful thing about these cloud environments is it's often small businesses and the SMB market in general that can benefit from it, because it allows you to have kind of that large office enterprise type environment while paying for it on a fractional basis, per user or per license. So you can do it without a significant capital expenditure up front, like you've had to do traditionally.
And certainly big giants like Microsoft and Google and Amazon are all helping companies move to the cloud. And so there's lots of options. So as a small business, where is a good place to start? What are easy places for us to be kind of cloud first thinking?
Yeah, definitely. So what we've seen is usually the best jumping off point to start moving your infrastructure to the cloud is using Office 365, which has now been rebranded as Microsoft 365. Just about everyone, or a significant percentage of folks, at least in the SMB market, are using Outlook for email. They're used to it. They're used to the office productivity apps, your Word, Excel, PowerPoint. And when you move your email out to Microsoft 365, you can also license these Office apps along with that email license. And that's usually the easiest point to start, and it gives you, a lot of the benefits. It's fairly expensive and fairly labor intensive to run an email server in-house. So we found that this is the best point to start. Beyond kind of the email and the Office licensing pieces, you can also look at, in most situations, totally outsourcing that server environment or getting it out into the cloud using Azure Active Directory and Intune for authentication and rights management and device management as well.
And isn't it true that right now, for a lot of folks who are using Microsoft 365 and an on-premise Active Directory server, they are utilizing kind of this Azure Active Directory technology already?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. So Office 365, the email piece, it is based on the authentication piece is Azure AD. Yes.
And I think that's something that we talk about when we migrate folks to Office 365. We talk about their existing environment and how we can create more efficiencies, because central management is great unless you have multiple points of central management. And so this conversation around Azure Active Directory and Intune seem to makes a lot of sense to kind of start educating folks on what that next level of cloud adoption looks like. Mm-hmm. And so, the authentication piece and the device management piece, and love to, the whole premise of this is to pick your brain on it. And so, let's just give everyone the high level view of what Azure Active Directory is.
Yeah, so at its core, Azure Active Directory is an authentication service. So without diving too deep into the technical side of it, Azure AD can authenticate you to a ton of different resources. It can sync with on-prem infrastructure. It's kind of the authentication backbone of 365 and Azure resources. And there are at least hundreds, if not thousands, of different third-party applications that you can authenticate to with that Azure Active Directory login. So with the policies that you can enforce through Azure AD for security, which we'll dive into a little bit more in a few minutes, it makes for a more secure environment when you have this one centralized authentication source for your organization.
Now, before we dive specifically into Azure Active Directory and all its wonderful benefits, when I was first introduced to this technology, my mind thought, all right, most Office networks are already using Microsoft Active Directory. It's on that server in your office. It's used to control managers. It's used to control and manage access for users and those devices. And with the introduction of cloud services, why is it important for small businesses to think differently about how we control users' access?
Yeah, definitely. So there are obviously the security implications there. There are more folks trying to get into your data, trying to compromise what you have. So it's important to kind of grow with the times and be on a forward-facing platform like this. The other piece that we see is from an uptime standpoint. Just thinking, like, how many times have you heard one of your folks say, I can't get into VPN, I can't get to my file shares, the server's not working? And it could be a configuration issue, it could be that you've lost power at the office, it could be any number of things. But the main business benefit that we see from this is higher availability of systems, higher availability of services, which ultimately turns into your business running more efficiently and being able to accomplish the business goals you're trying to reach.
And with the adoption of more cloud services that need to go beyond what we can do on that local network.
Correct.
Important. So then let's just jump into it, Brian. Let's talk about the benefits.
Yeah, definitely. So this slide covers a lot of it here. So we talked a little bit earlier about how there's a huge benefit to having a single centralized authentication source. And a couple of the additional benefits of Azure AD is it does have these higher level security options. So you've got MFA, multi-factor authentication, and essentially what that means is exactly what it says: multiple forms of authentication, something like a password, and something you have, whether it's a code that's generated on your phone, whether it's a hardware token like a YubiKey or something similar like that. So that prevents somebody from getting a compromised password or guessing your password, whatever the case may be, and being able to get into all your data, being able to get into this central authentication source that can kind of branch out from there into your other applications. So this allows your organization to roll out a lot higher level security within this authentication system. So from a user standpoint, you do have some additional ease of administration pieces like self-service password resets. Anybody that's in IT, knows those password reset requests come in continuously. And with this, you empower your users to do those password resets securely on their own. And it can even write back into your Active Directory environment in-house if you're on kind of a hybrid setup between cloud and on-prem resources.
So that, can you give a little bit more everyday explanation of what that means?
Yeah, definitely. Around the self-service password resets or the multi-factor.
About the write-back.
Yeah, about the right back. So essentially you have the traditional setup. You've got a server in-house with Active Directory where everybody logs into that server to get to their file shares, that type of thing. With a server in-house and with Office 365 housing your email in the cloud, you can essentially set up a sync between those. And what Writeback will do is whenever one of your users resets their password on 365, it is synced with that on-prem environment. So it can write back that updated password to Active Directory. So that reduces like multiple spots you have to update your password, and oh, they're not in sync, so it works here, but it doesn't work there. It takes away you know, a lot of the complexity from a user standpoint there.
That makes sense. I mean, simplifying the end user experience is probably one of the most important driving factors of technology. Simplified usually means, if done well, means security. So that's, you know, that's great to hear. I also wanted to ask you, when we talk about multi-factor authentication, a lot of times you hear, oh, that's one more step. It's an added complexity. My users don't like it. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the technology has advanced to kind of work around some of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, you're exactly right, Marissa. That's one of the most common pushbacks we hear against multi-factor authentication is, oh, I've got to take my phone out and get a code, or oh, I've got to, you know, it's one more step every time I log in. So Microsoft has something called conditional access, and it's essentially where you can set parameters around safe locations or devices, or a number of different different variables based on your business and security requirements. So you could say like, hey, if this user is in the office here, we deem that to be, you know, an acceptable security risk or a safe enough location not to require MFA on every login. So so that is a system that that keeps the users secure, but also tries to introduce you know, a little bit more ease of login in a day-to-day or on a day-to-day basis.
And I know how important security is, and even I can find some, you know, multi-factor authentication can be frustrating if I'm in, you know, if I'm in the mood or the mode and I'm, you know, hammering away. And so, of course, me being the inquisitive mind that I am, did a little bit of research, and I found that Azure Active Directory also has this concept of passwordless authentication. Is that the same as multi-factor authentication?
No, that's a little bit different, and without diving too much into the technical side of it, they're both methods that Microsoft uses on their end to keep the user safe while simplifying authentication.
Got it. So it's almost like you can build using the features of Azure Active Directory to really just, again, hone in on how can we keep our data safe as it becomes more mobile, accessed by multiple devices. Got it. So
yeah,
like
and that's a big thing, is the bring your own device. You know, we have our personal phones, we have our iPads, we have home machines, we have office machines. So you know, all of those devices introduce multiple points where your network and where your data can be compromised. So this also addresses that, you know, where you have all those devices you're trying to access the environment from.
That makes sense. It's like manage everything from one place. And then I say everything, and I'm hesitant because Azure AD, it's a part of kind of Microsoft's tools. Are we bound to only using this technology across Microsoft?
You're
Or
not, no. That's one of the beauties of it. Uh, Azure AD can authenticate to a ton of different cloud services. So you've got stuff like Salesforce, Dropbox. Trying to think of some of the more popular ones off the top of my head. We've even, although I don't know that I would use Azure AD for this, we've even seen it be set up to authenticate G Suite accounts. Okta, a number of different places you can use Azure AD, and a ton of the more popular software as a service apps support it.
that's so
So
cool.
before y'all move too far off of MFA, we have a couple of questions on that. So one of the questions was, can I enable MFA, multi-factor authentication, for only certain users?
That's a good question. That's one we get fairly often. The answer is, from a technical standpoint, it is possible. We very, very strongly recommend against it. And the reason for that is, we'll have somebody come to us and say, hey, we've got 40 users, and only the C-level executives, 5 or so, are the only ones we want to turn MFA on for. And the reasons that we get, or the justifications that we hear for that a lot of times are, the VIPs have more important info, or they may have deeper access to critical systems. But in practice, from what we've seen, is that any compromised employee, regardless of who it is, can cause you wide-scale issues if they get compromised. So we very strongly recommend that you enable it for all users.
And that's, you can't say that enough. I think, based on my experience of conversations with clients and talking about multi-factor authentication, to now when I write blogs that ever talk about multi-factor authentication, or really any cyber attack, that when one account is compromised, it could lead them all the way to the critical things. And so, that's something that we can't stress enough.
Yeah, and it's it is not very labor intensive on the users when it's set up properly. So that there's no reason not to do it. There's a ton of benefit to having it set up for all your accounts.
And go ahead, Dawn. You had one more question before I start to get carried away.
That's okay. I do that too when I'm excited about stuff. So there was one other question about MFA, and that's in regards to the parameters that you were talking about for when you can require MFA, or like judge it as an acceptable risk. So with everybody going more virtual and not being in the office, is that relevant anymore? If we're putting parameters around MFA to not be required in the office, but now that everybody's working from home, can that still be a valuable feature or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you can put a lot of different parameters around it. You can restrict it to physical locations. So you can say, hey, if this person is accessing from Raleigh or from United States or whatever it is, maybe that combined with a number of other variables, we would deem that a reasonable risk or deem it safe. Whereas, if they're trying to log in from somewhere in South America, odds are it's probably not them. So we'll present them with that MFA prompt. So there are other risk factors and variables that you can use conditional access for.
Cool. That's it. That's all I got for now. But feel free to send in more questions. We love questions.
Brian, this no more VPN, it's intriguing because we saw this wave of requests to set up VPNs and get connected into the environment securely from a remote location. So can you just talk a little bit more about why Azure Active Directory lets you get rid of your VPN?
Yeah, so there are still use cases for VPN in certain instances, but generally VPN has traditionally had two primary functions. So number one is to allow you to securely access those internal resources on your server in your office. And the number two reason that VPN was primarily used is to encrypt all traffic. Generally, if you're accessing resources that are secure, HTTPS, where everything's encrypted already, the risk is a lot lower, but there are definitely certain use cases where VPN could be useful. But in a lot of those cases, a setup like this will negate the need for it.
And that's also another thing that's important to kind of pause on, is that the technology we're talking about today, as everyday, are certainly, we find to be very advantageous for small businesses to think about. We know that there's a lot of technology out there, but it is important that it is dependent on your particular environment as to whether all of these pieces or some of these pieces make sense. We'll have some folks who have an application that lives internally, and might need to continue running that on-premise hardware. So Azure Active Directory can help enable the cloud components. So, just a reminder to folks that it's always good to talk to your IT team, or if you're a WorkSmart client, your account manager or consultant, about how these technologies actually fit within your particular business.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point, in that if you do have a line of business app that lives in-house, you can almost always move it out to some combination of Azure resources, but depending on what it is and the application specific requirements, in certain cases, it can get expensive to the point where it's not worth it, but your consultant or account manager can help advise you on that. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else that I've on with Azure Active Directory, or is it time to start talking about subscriptions, kind of how this gets licensed?
Yeah, we can go ahead and talk a little bit about how it's licensed. So Marissa, you touched on earlier about how 365 is kind of the authentication is Azure AD on the back end. There are a number of different levels of Azure AD. You have the base functionality, then there are upgraded licenses that allow this conditional access piece and some of the more advanced features of Azure Active Directory. And then also you can get Intune licensing, which we'll be talking about in just a few minutes for device management and policy and that type of thing.
And there, again, my little alert across the internet told me that it has already rolled out for Microsoft 365 Business. So before the rebranding, this was the Microsoft 365 Business Premium. Actually, I might have that backwards. Might have been Microsoft 365 Business and is now Microsoft 365 Business Premium. This is a $20 a month license that gives you some added features on top of your traditional Office 365 subscription. So those are your apps, your email, your productivity suite. If you joined us in the past for our Teams and Office 365 trainings, we focused on the Office 365 subscriptions. But there is this higher level, the Microsoft 365 Business Premium, that allows you to incorporate more of this advanced features. And now, as a response to COVID-19, Microsoft has actually added the Azure AD Premium package to that license set. So now you have, the idea is that you buy one license to encompass more features. So just another way that Microsoft is trying to make the technology more accessible at an affordable price. And
Yeah.
that was my commercial for Microsoft.
Yeah, P1 gives you some really cool stuff on the administration end. Um, you know, the write back that we talked about, the self-service password reset. So as well as some conditional access features. So yeah, that's a great thing.
But the MFA on its own is actually just an inherent feature of the Azure Active Directory free, correct?
Yeah, MFA, you can do MFA with your normal 365 license.
Got it. So Dawn, I think before we transition into managing your devices with Intune, are there any questions?
Yes. So I have one I have one question that I'm not sure if that's actually about this right now or related, but we can address it now. And it says, can this completely replace my domain controller?
In some situations, yes. So if you have, you know, kind of a traditional SMB setup where you have a domain controller with some file shares and you know, nothing crazy as far as line of business apps living in house, that type of thing, then yes, absolutely it can. If you have,
way to say that answer, it depends.
it depends. Yes, that's the traditional IT answer, right? It depends. But in a lot of cases, yes, it absolutely can totally replace your on-prem infrastructure.
And my introduction actually into Intune, of course, I mean, let me back it up. Intune has been around for several years. It's by no means like a brand new technology. But my introduction really into Intune started to become when I was having conversations with clients about the need to be more mobile and to want to replace that internal, that on-premise infrastructure. And so my intro was Azure Active Directory is great for the user management piece, but there's this whole other aspect of what a domain controller does when it comes to actually enforcing on devices. And then, of course, there's this whole concept of everyone's bringing their own device and multiple devices to access information. So, you know, this Intune is a very important conversation for us to have. Let's just hop into that then.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, a little about Intune. It's exactly what you were saying, Marissa, where it allows you to manage a lot of these devices. And yeah, traditionally one of the big things with domain controllers is that you can have what's called group policy, which are very granular device restrictions or device configurations that you can push either to certain groups of machines or across the organization. And that's been something that IT departments have leaned on fairly heavily to enforce certain security pieces, to enforce certain configuration pieces. So Intune, in addition to supporting different devices, you know, Intune is mobile device management. So you can support your Android devices, your iPhones, your iPads, Macs, Windows machines. It also does mobile application management. So you can push apps to devices. You can do a number of different functions around that. And it also does, it is a subset of what group policy can do, but it is a subset that is consistently growing. So you can push a lot of those policies, a lot of those settings that you may have previously done with group policy. They're all not there, but a lot of the more common ones are. So that can be very handy if you have you know, applications you need to push across the environment, if you need to have settings pushed across the environment, you know, any number of those types of things.
Device management is, you know, one of those things when you talk about bring your own device, you want to make sure that you're protecting your company data, regardless if it's on your device or an employee-owned device. And so is there, is there a way to handle that differently?
Yeah, so one of you're talking about all the different kinds of devices. One of the common questions that we get is around, um, around like employee-owned devices. I may say like, I don't want that stuff on my device. It's mine. I may be accessing some work resources, but I want some privacy on my device. And Intune can do some really cool things around that in that it will only restrict and control the company and resources. It's not gonna have access to your photos. It's not gonna have access to all your other data that lives on the device. So on employee-owned devices, it has some benefits around that. On company-owned devices, you can do full management of them, just like kind of a traditional environment.
So is that the difference between like a mobile device management and a mobile application management?
There are some more differences there. Some of the main things that you would get with an Intune that you wouldn't get with kind of traditional MDM are you can do more types of devices, like Macs are supported with Intune. There are some more functionalities like with Intune versus MDM. Intune will let you push business apps to the devices. You can enroll and manage things in device groups. So there are a number of more features, and there are a lot more granular controls on what you can do. Push in Wi-Fi settings for corporate environments, pushing VPN settings if you need it, email policies, that type of thing. Whereas with the traditional MDM, there are some very limited things you can do, like enforcing pins, wiping the device if it's lost, or wiping company data if an employee's left the company or something. But Intune gives you a lot more control, a lot more granular control of the environment, and some more abilities.
And now, like, I'm looking at the slide deck, and I love this image because the way the clouds are kind of overlapping, but Microsoft Azure is obviously way bigger. Do these two play off each other, correct?
Yes. So Intune, is an integral part of kind of the Azure environment. When your account manager, when your consultant is building out how this looks and works best for your business, Intune is going to be an important piece of that strategy.
Now, what about subscriptions? How does Intune work?
So Intune can be licensed a number of different ways. There are some of the 365 licensing it's included with. You can also license it in a standalone fashion. We usually recommend getting it as part of one of the subscription bundles, just because it's a whole lot cheaper, and Microsoft has bundled these packages pretty well. Where I think Intune is $6 standalone, but for $8 you can get Intune plus a ton of different features that are great.
And then even so, with the those add-ons start to add up, which is why
Sure.
that Microsoft 365 Business Premium, the tongue twister, is starting to become more affordable and more attractive because it's bundling kind of all those different pieces together to give you that enterprise mobility and security, while also giving you the relevant tools, small business tools that you need for productivity and mobility.
Correct. Yeah, that license you were talking about earlier, that's generally the sweet spot. It'll give you pretty much everything you need from pretty much everything we've been talking about. So you've got the Office apps, you've got the email, you've got the security, you've got the more advanced features like conditional access, and you've got this Intune license in that. So that's definitely the sweet spot. That is the for most organizations going to be the ideal mix, and that's why Microsoft has packaged it that way.
Yeah, I know that I was taken by surprise when I saw the announcement that Microsoft, it was a couple months back, that in fact, Dawn and I were in the middle of doing all of our marketing around our Office 365 Teams training. So we were trying to remember to call it Microsoft 365, but that is why they've rebranded away from Office 365 so that they could take all of these different pieces of the Microsoft puzzle and put them together and make it one brand. Marketing savvy on their part.
That's
sure.
Right. Initially confusing to us, but a good long-term idea for sure.
Yes, I like that. You know, it's always a challenge when you rebrand something and, you know, 8 years after it started. But Dawn, do you have any, I think this is a good point to say, any questions?
One point of clarification, I think it was the day before we launched that training. It wasn't, we had no warning. It's like the day before. Anyway, yeah, so there's a couple of questions regarding Intune. One is, if we use a Mac, does Intune make it so I can manage it in the same way I do now with PCs?
There are a couple of differences, but yes, you can manage Macs with Intune. Essentially, you use either Apple Configurator or APM Apple Profile Manager to configure those settings. But yes, you can bring Macs into Intune to manage them.
Cool. Okay. So I have another question. It says, if Office 365 comes with built-in mobile device management, this is going back a little bit, why do we need Intune?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's some of the additional features that Intune provides over 365 with the mobile application management. You know, being able to push apps. You know, being able to push those environment settings like your Wi-Fi networks or certificates or VPN settings. There are a number of additional pieces from a management perspective and from a user experience and security perspective that Intune provides that you would not get with just the standard Office 365 MDM.
And the standard Office 365 MDM, will that allow you to kind of apply that application management beyond the Office 365 suite or Microsoft 365?
So the 365 MDM will not, but the MAM, the Intune piece, that will allow you to push different apps. You can push like your internal business apps, or you can push things from the Microsoft store. There are a number of different, a ton of different actually third-party apps that you can push and manage through Intune.
Thousands.
Yes, yeah, without a doubt.
So that's all of the questions that I have in the queue right now. But if you're listening, feel free to send in more questions.
Yeah, because I think at this point, you know, we've got about 14 minutes left to the hour. You know, next steps is always an important conversation. You know, and before you dive deep into implementing these solutions or apply, you know, trying to figure out how they apply to your organization, it's really important to sit down and make sure that that is the right step for your organization. So what is your advice to folks on next steps?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing that I would say is to, you know, sit down with your IT person, sit down with your consultant or account manager if you're with WorkSmart, and talk through a strategy, because ultimately you don't want to implement technology for the sake of technology. You have to know what your business goals are. You have to know kind of what your requirements are in that area. And then you can sculpt a solution around that. So how that looks for most clients that we talk to, if they're not on Office 365, start there. Start there with getting your email out to the cloud. That's the most impactful piece for a lot of folks. You know, get your Office licensing in line with 365, and then from there, you know, once everybody's used to that, once everybody's functioning there, then start to look at some of these more advanced things. Getting rid of the server, moving everything out to Azure, app authentication, device management, all the more advanced things we've talked about.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's whenever we talk about more technologies, we also want to make sure we say the right technologies.
Yep.
Let's see, John, do you have any other questions?
So we have one last question that came in the queue. And I know we touched on this a little bit already, but Brian, so can you tell us a little bit more about employee-owned devices? So this question says, with employee-owned devices, we run into concerns about privacy. How can we address this with users?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this management is only going to provide, or is only going to restrict specific things and have access to specific things. So you have like your email apps, your Intune secure browser. There are a number of different pieces that Intune will manage, but it's not gonna, like grab your pictures and download them to the company server, or grab your docs on your device that aren't specifically like company-owned data or part of that silo, if you will. So my recommendation to folks would, again, talk to your IT advisor, get some more granular information about this, and then be transparent with your employees, be transparent with your team. Tell them like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is exactly what it does. Here's how it does it. And that transparency and honesty will make your folks feel more at ease in putting something like this on their devices to protect company data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have one question that just popped up, but thanks for clarifying that. Communication is so important, and transparency when it comes to this stuff is so important too. So then the other question that popped up says, when we talk about moving data from on-prem servers into Azure, are we talking about that data going into OneDrive or SharePoint?
That's a great question. And the answer is it can go into one of those, or it can go into, there are different file services within Azure, and that really depends on your situation and your business requirements. So it can go into document libraries, it can go into OneDrive. There are pluses and minuses to each. It can also go into third-party apps like Box or Dropbox for Business, or ShareFile, or any one of 50 different ones. And really, the best route for you, depending on that, is something that should be shaped by the business requirements and what your users need out of the service.
And we're actually, that's a question that a lot of folks have. Microsoft 365 has opened up a lot of tools. And so the question is, which tools? So we're going to be doing a session here in a few weeks about the technology within inside of Microsoft 365 for file storage. So the OneDrive for Business, the SharePoint, and even how Teams comes into that. So Don will tell us in a few minutes about the events coming up, but had to plug that.
Yeah, that's actually probably a great segue into upcoming events, because I don't currently have any other questions in the queue. So we have a couple minutes left, so if you have questions, definitely send them in. We're happy to address them. While you're typing furiously, Marissa, can you transition over to the upcoming events slide?
Sure can.
You can stop here, because I forgot that this was here.
Right.
Look at us. Yeah, so if you have additional questions after this webinar, or if you're watching the recording of this webinar in the future, you can reach out to any of us. We're happy to chat with you, and Brian is an excellent resource, so all of our contact information is here. And now if you can go on to the upcoming events slide. Thank you. Ta-da! Marissa and your Vanna White. Yeah, all right. So we have several episodes coming up in the Back to the Future series, because I think, as I've probably mentioned a gajillion times at this point, it's a 13-episode series and it's a weekly. So we've got several weeks of content, which is very exciting. So it looks like I actually put in the wrong image. So today is virtual reality. And next week, we are back with our friends from Viking Mergers and Acquisitions. And we had them on the Fast Forward panel last week, and they're going to be talking with us about something a little, different than technology, right? We're going to be talking about business acquisitions and making that part of your growth strategy, which has been a part of our growth strategy here at WorkSmart for years and years. And these guys are really great and they know what they're talking about. So again, we're thinking about the future. We're thinking about growing in this time, and selling or buying can be part of that strategy for you. So then the following week, we're going to be talking about communicating in the cloud and a lot of cloud technology that's designed for communications. And then can you back? Yeah, thank you. All right. So then after that, the session that is missing from the slide because I put the wrong images in is actually the file storage episode that Marissa mentioned. Is called Files Everywhere, because I don't know if this drives you crazy, but it drives me crazy when there's files kind of all over the place and there's so many different options within Microsoft 365 for file storage. So we're going to be talking about the different options that are available, like OneDrive and SharePoint, and some best practices for when to use those and how they come together somewhat in teams. So definitely join that session. It's going to be a good one. And then here is a full list of everything else that's coming up in this series, including some stuff on backups. And then we have our friend Becky Jacobs, who was on last week's panel as well, coming in to talk about workplace culture. And then we're doing 2 more sessions on Teams, because we know how much everybody loved that in our last series. Got cybersecurity, and then we're going to be back at the end of the series talking about virtual reality again, but we're going to be talking about VDI and that technology, and we're going to be doing a little bit of a demo with that, so that's going to be kind of cool. So you can check out these events on our new events center on the website. By going to info.worksmart.com/event center and register for all those fun things there. So that's it. I know that was a mouthful, but thank you for listening and joining. I don't see any other questions in the queue right now. Marissa, do you have any last things?
No, the only thing I have is a very big thank you to Brian for giving us his time to participate in this webinar. His perspective and experience is invaluable. So I am very grateful for the help. Thank you, Brian. And of course,
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And Dawn, thank you again for hosting such wonderful events.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you so much to all of you for listening in, and again, the Durham Chamber of Commerce for making this content available for all of the local chamber members. And Marissa, you did an awesome job. Brian, you did an awesome job. Everybody's just awesome today. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Thanks, y'all.